So this presentation is recorded or will be recorded. And it will be posted to the Camas Public Library's YouTube page that has other NatureScaping recordings as well. And I will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this event with the link in case you wanted to watch it again or share it with a friend. So it is, there will be a question and answer period. It will be at the end of Eric's presentation. So if you do have any questions, we ask that you jot them down and then save them till the end of the presentation, which will be around an hour. Once we start the question and answer period, you'll be able to either type your question into the chat, and there is at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a little icon that says chat. That's currently turned off right now, and I'll turn that on at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask your question aloud, that is also possible. You'll just have to use the raise hand icon that's also at the bottom of the Zoom window. So again, we'll have the question and answer period at the end of Eric's presentation. And that's it for me. So I'm going to turn things over to Marlene from NatureScaping of Southwest Washington.
Hello, everybody. It's Marlene from NatureScaping of Southwest Washington. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to Eric. Eric is from the Clean Water Outreach Specialist from Clark County Public Works. We thank him for joining us today and giving this presentation, which I'm sure now that we're starting the rainy season, everyone can get something out of this. NatureScaping, just for those of you who are not totally familiar, we are the organization, not-for-profit organization that manages the Wildlife Botanical Gardens in Brush Prairie. It's near the Casey Center, if that is a point of recognition for anyone. Please come and see. We have 3 acres of beautiful gardens with 10 distinct gardens. And you can also check us out on our website, naturescaping.org. You can find out all about the gardens, our future classes, how to be a member if you'd like. We're just finishing up our normal volunteer season. So if you're interested in getting any information about us or future classes and events, please feel free to drop us an email, which you can get to from our website. So anyway, thank you so much. This presentation is one of our monthly classes that we do as a benefit for membership. Of course, pre-COVID, we used to meet in person. Now we're doing it on Zoom. Hope to get in person again. And just for those of you who are with us, we will be doing our Mason Bee class next month in person at Prairie High School. More information will be coming about that soon. So without further ado, please let me introduce Eric, who will tell you more about himself. Thank you very much. Go for it, Eric.
All right, thanks, Marlene. And I want to support that plug for NatureScaping of Southwest Washington. I took my kids there in the spring, and we just had a ball. Spent a couple hours walking around and looking at all the plants and walking through the gardens. And I think it's time to come back in the fall, because I don't think I've been there in the fall. It's probably the kind of place that you like to see throughout the different seasons. So great place to get inspiration and also learn more about some plants that you could incorporate into your landscape. So as Marlene said, I'm Eric Lambert. I am the Clean Water Outreach Specialist for Clark County Public Works. I've been with the county about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was with WSU Extension for about 5 years, beginning with the Watershed Stewards Program, which is a kind of a learn and serve program now being run by the Clark Conservation District. And then also the small acreage program, which is still going at WSU Extension. So if there's any small acreage land managers or land stewards out there that would like to learn more about managing their land and animals in a sustainable way that protects natural resources, I encourage you to check out WSU Extension, not to mention the Master Gardener program, which a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today, you can find more information from some of their places as well. Well, let's get started. You know, I think that I could tell you about why it's important to protect water quality, but I'd rather just start this presentation by showing you a little bit. We are really fortunate, and when I look through some of these photos, it just reminds me of the gratitude I have for living in such a beautiful place. And you know, my goal when I see these waters up in Lucia Falls is that I want these waters to be just as clean as they pass through my house, by my house in Burnt Bridge Creek. Obviously not the same watershed, but you kind of get what I'm saying here is you want to keep them just as clean as when they're coming in as when they're going out, maybe even better. Because they're worth exploring. We have so many rivers and streams in our county. They're just great for getting the kids out, getting out yourself, maybe doing some recreation. Here's one of your local ones here in Round Lake. Great time of year to visit that. Worth protecting, because not just the beauty that we can enjoy as humans, but our friends and our animal kingdom friends here that we rely on as part of our ecosystem that supports us as well. And so you might be asking, what can you do? Well, you've probably seen these type of storm drain medallions that are a nice reminder that only rain goes down the drain, and that's to protect water. But as we'll see throughout this presentation, you know, having the medallion in front of the storm drain is one thing. But I think that message, only rain in the drain, really extends all the way to our homes and our own personal behaviors and choices that we make at home and how we do things. So at the end of the day, what's outside of our home will usually get picked up by the rain, carried by stormwater down that drain. And it comes out a place like this. This is right under the I-5. This is right under I-5 at Salmon Creek near Kleinline Pond there. This is a storm outfall on a day where it wasn't really rainy, but you know, there'll be a little bit of water in the system still typically, because this is water that's being collected from you know, square miles of yards, of driveways, of roads, and it sure does collect a lot of stuff, and it all comes out right here. And one of the common misperceptions that people have is that water that goes down that storm drain is treated or cleaned in some way. Now, in some cases, that there may be some treatments in stormwater facilities, but those facilities do have their limitations, and they're not able to filter out all of the, for example, bacteria from pet waste would be one pollutant that wouldn't necessarily be filtered out in a biofiltration swale or a detention pond. And so other homes that were built before the stormwater facility regulations came into place may just drain directly from their home right down the storm drain, which might come out right here into Salmon Creek untreated. A lot of people don't necessarily see these outfalls, so maybe sometimes it's out of sight, out of mind. But just thought that would be a good time to think about that. And so what really is in that stormwater? Well, this is the real stormwater. This stormwater was collected along Highway 99 in Hazeldale by some of our scientists in the Clean Water Division, the folks that go out there and monitor our streams for water quality. And we have all sorts of different types of monitoring efforts that go throughout the year. And one of them is to monitor stormwater at different times. And so this is, we have like a little brown box there along Highway 99 that will kind of collect the stormwater. And you can just imagine, I mean, looking at the color, it looks nothing like the type of water that you'd want to swim in. And so what is in that water? Well, things like fertilizer that might have run off from people's yards, pet waste that was left outside in someone's yard or in the park or on the sidewalk that gets contaminated with stormwater, oil leaks and drips. They did a study in the Puget Sound actually, and they were looking at the source of oil pollution in the Puget Sound. And they were trying to figure out where it was coming from. And they actually determined that 66% of the oil pollution in Puget Sound came from small vehicle leaks and drips, which blew my mind when I heard of it. You know, you think of maybe an oil barrel or something dropping off of a ship or something. But no, this was the small leaks and drips of a car dripping, you know, driving around town. And it's easy to miss that type of leak, you know, during the summer particularly, but boy, in the fall, that first time it rains, you see all sorts of rainbows that you don't want to be following. Pesticides, another one, herbicides, pesticides kind of lumped in that same group there. Things that are highly toxic to fish. You know, what goes on your yard outside, there's a good chance that at least some of that will be washed off into stormwater down that storm drain. Tire residue, another one. And tires have all sorts of zinc and other heavy metals that that interfere with a lot of the sensory organs for salmon. And yeah, a lot of it is based around salmon because they're such a keystone species, such an iconic species, such a cultural species for the people that have been here for all of time, our native tribal members. And other pollutants include sediment, you know, even things like a leaky dumpster, dumpsters that are left open outside of a business or something. You know, the water will go in, it will rust out the bottom of that dumpster. Well, now you have a different kind of mess every time it rains, you know, water, garbage leaking out the dumpster. And if you go to the business, you can see a lot of these things. Once you kind of put on that lens of being a stormwater or what we call a source control detective, you can see this kind of stuff. I challenge you to go to a parking lot next time and look in the parking spaces, and you'll see all sorts of black spots and the asphalt is degraded, and that's from oil leaks. Or look outside of a dumpster, and if you see a trail of some discoloration along the pavement, well, that dumpster is leaking. Or if there's a business and you see some kind of like white streaks going down toward the storm drain, there's a chance that business is dumping their wash water down their storm drains. So, you know, we see it in this stuff, we see it in the built environment, and we know about it. And so we try to address that. Now, pollution is one part of it, but the other part of it is also the amount of stormwater that we have now. Now that we've built this environment, we used to have a big sponge here, basically. Our forests with all these evergreen trees are practically designed to hold water with all that surface area among their needles throughout the year, throughout the rainy season. But now that we've lost a lot of forest and we've replaced it with hard surfaces, everything from parking lots to roads to sidewalks to roofs, you know, it looks a lot different. And that added runoff, you know, the goal of it for many years was really just to get it out of sight, out of mind. And so you'll even see some of these old homes that were, you know, particularly around, I've seen a number around Salmon Creek and Hazeldale that were built in the 60s and 70s, where their downspouts will be buried underground and will go right to a weep hole in the curb. So that just really shows you the goal there and the mindset there was to just get rid of this water as soon as possible. And you could kind of get what they were thinking about back then. We don't want flooding issues. Before that, we were just really having the downspouts, you know, on a splash block going out into the yard. But now that we're channeling all of that water into our streams as quickly as it can, it causes problems. It causes problems when we have a heavy rain event and a place like Salmon Creek here, which is in a highly developed part of our county now, it can't handle all of that water. So you have erosion problems, you'll have stream banks that are eroding more and more, and then that will have more issues later on as the stream health and the stream structure, the stream bank structure will continue to decline and cause other type of problems as well. So those are some of the things that we're facing. And before I kind of talk about some of the other things that we had kind of mentioned, some of the things that that might align more with naturescaping, I wanted just to take a moment to just refresh everyone's mind about things that people can do. Everybody can do some of these things at home. Because truth be told, when we talk about polluted stormwater, we're really talking about the #1 source of water pollution to our streams and rivers and lakes today in our country. Prior to the Clean Water Act, you saw the Cuyahoga Lake catching on fire in Ohio. And that was really, set off all the alarms. We got to do something because these businesses are dumping their waste right into this river and having some really serious consequences. And so with the Clean Water Act, we started to regulate those businesses, clean them up. You got to have a permit if you want to pollute, and that permit's probably going to mean that you're not going to be able to pollute. You're going to have to figure out a different way to dispose of your waste that won't be getting into our water. Because boy, once things get into water, it's really hard to get it back out. And so once that happened and those businesses started getting cleaned up, the big problem became stormwater. And even though we say stormwater is the #1 source, that's a little bit misleading because really stormwater pollution is, comes from all sorts of sources. That's why we call it non-point source pollution, because it's not from a single point. It's from daily behaviors. It's from driving, stuff that we all do. It's from pet waste left outside. And so these are some things that we can do at home that will help to reduce stormwater pollution. And it really takes everyone's effort, everyone to do these little things to really just make a difference and move the needle. So picking up pet waste, even at home, sweeping up instead of washing stuff away, which is really kind of a cultural thing that, we say wash things away. I even have it right here. It conveys a cleaning kind of mentality. But if you think about it, where is that really going? You may be washing it down to the storm drain, which just moves that pollution to somewhere else. Fixing vehicle leaks, maintaining tire pressure so that there's less tire residue and your car is more efficient. And really just generally being mindful of what you do outside and to make sure that whatever you do, whatever activity you're doing outside, that won't be picked up by stormwater. Kind of moving into some more of the yard type of stuff, reducing chemicals used in the water in the yard. And there's different ways to do that. There are different less toxic alternatives that you can use. Obviously, if you do need to use something like that, and there are certain weeds and invasive species that need some type of herbicide to be treated, and that's kind of one of those catch-22s. But there are certain species, Japanese knotweed, for example, which requires an herbicide. And if it isn't treated with an herbicide, that's a type of invasive species that will also cause huge problems in our stream habitat as well. So sometimes it's kind of picking the lesser of two evils. But when you do that, if you do need to use some of these things, keep your eye on the weather. If it's going to be raining tomorrow and the next day, hold off until you have 3 sunny days in a row, and that will help to keep whatever is out there, on the plant and reduce the runoff. And I think really a big one is that tolerating some weeds and non-grass species is something that that we'll kind of get into more, tolerance. Limiting fertilizers and using only as needed. Organic slow release fertilizer. You can look for the OMRI label, which will indicate that it is an organic product, which will be kind of inherently slower released fertilizers. Testing the soils, which you can get some kits for at your WSU Extension office. And typically, I like to say read the label when you're using herbicides and pesticides, and I like to say read the label when you're using fertilizers. But I think sometimes with the fertilizers, the frequency of application may be a bit much on the label. I mean, it is a business. And so some of the more recent type of best practices really just, maybe once in the fall, if you need to fertilize your yard, maybe once in the fall could be enough. But we'll also talk about some other practices that will help to reduce fertilizer use as well. So let's just jump in there. I mean, lawns, they're a lot of work. I've got a lawn, and I've been trying hard to do this natural yard care. It's a lot of work. I rented an aerator last year, going to get that, aerating my yard a little bit, because I'm really trying to, make sure that I'm, putting into practice what I'm asking other people to do and what I'm advocating other people to do. And there are a lot of inputs, even if it's not, buying fertilizer or blasting chemicals on your yard or the weed and feed. Inputs like renting that aerator or buying a thatching rake and going out and thatching your yard. It certainly is possible to have a yard with grass, and there are definitely some benefits. My kids love to play. I like to play with my kids in the grass too, which is why I have some in my yard. But the more and more I keep putting in more and more of this time and energy, the more and more I start to take little pieces of my yard and give them a different use that might, in the long run, be a little bit less work for me. So real quick, we'll just talk about lawning better, because you can't just stand up here and say, hey, don't have grass, because I wouldn't do that. And I don't think a lot of people would just do that. I'm going to have some grass, but I'm going to have other uses too. And so grass cycling is one big thing, which is really just mowing it and letting it lie. And if you have a mulching lawnmower, that works really good. You want to leave that grass instead of taking it out, so that those pieces of cut grass can return nutrients and moisture to the soil. And that can provide 25 to 50% of your fertilizing needs, which is another way that you can reduce your fertilizer use. They say cut it high and let it lie. That's kind of the thing to remember. When you do cut, try not to cut more than a third of the grass at a time, because when you do cut more than a third, that will shock the grass. The height of the blade does correspond with the length and the mass of the root. So the more, so if you do have a little bit of a higher grass, you will have more root mass in there, which means more ability for that grass to uptake nutrients, to get water, and to compete better with other undesirable things. Keep those blades sharp. Here's a pro tip. I know you're not thinking about mowing your lawn right now, probably, but it's not a bad time to get your lawnmower blades sharpened, rather than in the spring when everyone else has that idea. Watering more sustainably, watering deeply, about 1 inch a week, is sufficient for most yards. And then occasionally you can aerate into thatch. I did that, was that last year? Maybe it was 2 years ago now, actually, that I did that. And so those are some things that you can do to kind of basically create a favorable environment for your grass to compete well, if that's what you want. And creating a tolerant mindset. So clovers in there, they're actually good. They can fix nitrogen, they stay greener longer. Mosses, very similar too. They don't require fertilizers. They stay green for longer. And sometimes mosses are just the best option for a location. I know there's a spot behind my house on the north side that it's just going to be mossy there, because it's, I'm not going to move any part of my house so that part of the grass gets more sun. So I'm just going to deal with that moss and be tolerant of it. And pulling weeds as needed. I do try to go out there and get those weeds, particularly before they go to seed. If I can make some efforts to to get out there and pull some weeds. And this is a great tool here that they have on the bottom photo there, that little weed wrench. There's a couple different products out there. I know getting those dandelions is a real pain, and even bending over and getting that stuff can be a real pain. So, if you have a tool that maybe your neighbor has a tool, maybe you have a tool that you'd share with your neighbor that can help you guys take care of the weeds that way before they go to seed. I think really making a concerted effort a couple times throughout the year can have some big benefits moving forward. Let's look at some more alternatives to lawns. We have a couple pictures here. We're going to really focus on a couple of these. The first picture is a one with a home that has a meadowscape, which is one alternative to lawn. Other people like to just make garden boxes and kind of have a food forest. I know I've dedicated part of my yard to starting to cultivate a small orchard that is going to be a food forest. Sometimes, even using rocks and just making a different type of landscape can be an alternative to high maintenance grass. But I want to talk about meadowscaping, and there's a great publication here, which I'll share with you. It's just called the Meadowscaping Handbook, and it came out somewhat recently published by the West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District, and they do great work. But it's kind of the idea that a lot of the habitat that was maintained and stewarded by native peoples were meadows and were kind of prairie grasses around this area. Now, prairie grasses are so well adapted and so resilient because they have tremendous root systems, and that helps them, helps them be able to uptake water and compete and outcompete other undesirable plants. Now, they also can help with biodiversity, because when you're meadowscaping, you can kind of choose a little bit more what you want in there. It doesn't all have to be native. You can intermingle native and non-native species. You can meadowscape to enhance pollinator and wildlife habitats, eliminate fertilizer and pesticide needs. And because those roots are so vigorous and deep, they also reduce irrigation needs and even can help with infiltration in your soil. So here's an example. When people are meadowscaping, that last picture, yeah, that person went, they went full on and they just did their front yard. I'll go back there real quick. They did their front yard. They also have some kind of a planter box in there. So I think they did it around there. But this person over here, these first two pictures are from one angle, and then the last picture is from another angle, from the opposite side, I think. And so they just took a small part of their yard, kind of, I think we all have this part of our yard somewhere, at least one spot that's too small to do anything with. It's neither here nor there. Maybe it's just grass that kind of gets mowed, but you don't really pay any attention to it, and it really probably might be moving more and more to just a weedy spot. That could be a great place for a meadowscape. Just a small area that you can dedicate to some of these plants that can help with biodiversity, and that can help with really all sorts of benefits, from pollinators to wildlife to stormwater improvements as well. So here's the handbook, and you can find this real easy by just Googling it. So if it's something that you're interested in, just jot that down right now. I don't have a link to it at the end. I don't have a link to to some of these guides that I have in here because the link is really kind of long and strange. But you can just Google that in the West Multnomah Soil Water Conservation District. And some of the things that I had mentioned before about incorporating the unused space, commingling natives and non-natives, and plan. That's kind of the big thing for doing a few of the things that we'll be discussing here, is to plan. Plan first and make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you get going, because it's always easier to try to think it out all the way through and really give it your best effort up front will help things down the line. So when you're doing that, you might look at your goals. Like, is it something that you want to attract pollinators? Are you looking more at, you know, some different other types of wildlife? Is it something that you just want super low maintenance? And then look at your resources and your constraints. What's your area? What's your space like? What's your time like? What is your, are there any financial constraints or that you might have to do this? Because there are going to be some upfront costs, both, you know, financially, but also regarding your time and your effort too. And also just looking at your site characteristics. So we'll move on to disconnecting downspouts. And this kind of goes, again, hitting on one of those key points about the problem with stormwater is all of the runoff that it causes. And so fortunately, we have some really neat ways to disconnect downspouts that can look nice in your home and or be functional too. The county had, for a little while back in 2017, piloted a downspout disconnect program, and a lot of the photos that I have on here are from that program. And there was like a reimbursement that homeowners could get if they disconnected their downspouts. And so some of these are from that. We did continue that program because primarily because there's a lot of work to do and there wasn't quite as much follow through with all of the people that expressed initial interest. But we do still have that information available on the county website. If you just search Clark County Downspout Disconnect Program, you'd be able to find that. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. It can be as simple or as elaborate as you'd like. I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the homes, you know, back in the day, you know, the first home I bought was a home from built in 1946, and that just had splash blocks, like a cement splash block on the downspouts. But the reason why we chose this pilot area, the area that we chose for this pilot project, was because all those, not all, but most of the homes in that area, in that area of Hazeldale and parts of Salmon Creek, had those little weep holes. And so there was that kind of time period in the 60s and 70s, early 80s, when we had kind of gone away from, we kind of moved into newer technologies, past older technologies that were kind of better, just like a splash block, onto just getting rid of the water as quick as we can. And before we kind of started having regulations that you have to manage your stormwater on site, which is where we are now. So it can be as simple as just having an extended downspout. You can do something with a rain garden, and that rain garden can, or not a rain garden, that rain barrel, and that rain barrel can kind of just be an extension of your downspout, because you're considering the overflow you have all set up to make sure that the overflow is draining to a place that can accept that water runoff. Or you can do some kind of cool little things like this. It's kind of like an infiltration trench, but kind of more just looks like a little faux stream. I really like this. I've seen a few houses like this around town. And I think that kind of faux stream look can work with a lot of different landscapes, and it can work as part of a lot of different types of things that we'll talk about today. So when you do disconnect your downspouts, you know, the idea is you just want that water to infiltrate on site, kind of like how nature had intended. That's going to help reduce the high flows, which cause stream erosion, but it will also help to improve low flows in the summer, because the more we recharge that groundwater, the more those streams will have some more water in the summer. That's kind of one of the effects of erosion, as you saw that picture of Salmon Creek, that bank that was eroding, basically getting wider and wider and wider. Well, that kind of makes sense in the winter, why it's happening, of course. But then in the summer, now you have this super wide stream with only a little bit of water coming through, which is not good for salmon, which warms up the water, which makes it difficult for a lot of our aquatic species to survive. So recharging that groundwater is good for this maintaining summer flows. And disconnecting downspouts is kind of maybe one of the first things that I would advocate, thinking about if you do want to have a stream-friendly landscape, because a lot of the features that we're going to be talking about today and some of the different things you can do are basically different ways to do something with that water. Now, I will say this. What I'm going to say here and the things I'm going to say today are guidelines, and I want to make sure that that's clear, because before you go out and do something, and I won't be speaking a whole lot of specifics about anything, but before you do go out and do something, make sure you get a couple opinions. If you do have additional questions, you can reach out to folks potentially at your at the local extension office, or I'll even have my email here. You can email me at the end. If you have additional questions, I can point you in some different directions. But make sure that, if you have a really concerning situation, or you're kind of on the fence about if you're feeling like this may or may not be something that kind of fits within those guidelines, that you get some professional help and have a professional opinion before you just go off and do something. So when you're thinking about disconnecting your downspouts, some of the guides that we have for success, the rule of thumb is you want to plan for about 10% of the area that you're draining for infiltration. So, if you have 500 square foot of roof area that you want to be draining, and that would be area of that roof, you need 50 feet of space in your yard to just infiltrate. And that's primarily just infiltrating, like dispersion, just like running off onto a grass landscape or a planted landscape. Now, there's the caveat there. You have to make sure that your soils have sufficient infiltration. There are some different things that you can do to get a feel for how your soil infiltration is. You can talk to your local extension office, and they have some maps that can kind of give you some ideas about how your soil drainage is. There are some hand tests you can do where you actually pick up that soil in your hand and bunch it up into a ball and open up your hand and kind of see how it acts after you've squeezed it. That will give you an idea of if your soil is more clay, clay would be really sticking together and keep that form in your hand, or more loamy or more sandy, where that whatever you squeezed wouldn't be quite as tight. But you can also do an infiltration test, which is something we'll kind of, I don't think I talk about it a whole lot in rain gardens, so I can talk about it now, but you can dig a hole and basically have a ruler in there and pour a certain amount of water in there, wait an hour, and then go back and look to see how much that water has infiltrated, and that will give you an infiltration rate. There are more detailed instructions on how to do that in the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook, which I will allude to later. But other things that you want to do when you're thinking about disconnecting your downspouts is to avoid slopes of greater than 10%, because you don't want to make your stormwater someone else's problem, which is why we also kind of get into some of the setback guidelines. At least 6 feet from a house or your foundation, your home foundation, like a basement or something. That may be more if you have poorly infiltrating soils, or depending on the slope of that area. 5 feet away from property lines. Again, all of this is kind of dependent on how your drainage is. But obviously, you're not allowed to be putting your stormwater from your house onto your neighbor's yard. And so 3 feet from public sidewalks, and make sure that you don't do it over drain fields. Those areas are, critical for the function of your home. And so you don't want to be adding additional water onto drain fields that would compromise its ability to do what it needs to do for the effluent from your house. Also, you want to avoid heavily used areas. You wouldn't want a long downspout extension pipe right where your kids are running back and forth, for example, where you wouldn't want it right next to a gate where a door needs to open. So just being thoughtful about how you do that. And one really good exercise, and this will be used for a lot of the things that you do on your yard and a lot of the improvements that you'll make on your yard, is to really just sketch up your property. If you have some graph paper, great. That can even help with calculating the amount of both area that you are receiving stormwater from, but also calculating the amount of area that you need for whatever, whether you're just dispersing it over the grass or whether you're building a rain garden or something like that. So that graph paper and some of these simple sketches can go a long way to making the right decisions for your property. So we'll just talk about some of the different options that we were talking about in the downspout disconnect program. These were the things that we were saying, homeowners, here are some things that you can do. So splash blocks, probably the most simple thing of them all. That one in the upper right-hand corner is just a simple plastic brown splash pad that you can buy at a hardware store for less than probably $20. But they also have some other neat ways to do those. I kind of like the way that they've done some of that stonework on that one in the top left-hand corner, and even that one right in the center there at the bottom. Just can give it a different look, and that's where I think you go from doing something that's just good for our local streams to doing something that's good for our local stream and making a neat feature out of it for your yard. Another thing we got here are these infiltration trenches, also kind of called faux streams. And yeah, I've seen a few of these around. I think these are a really neat way to connect. If you're really looking to kind of like get rid of a lot of your yard, these are some neat ways to incorporate kind of seamlessly how you manage your stormwater through that alternative lawn landscape in a different way. And they can also be can look really sharp when you have maybe one of these infiltration trenches or faux streams kind of leading up to a rain garden. That can look really good, or incorporate it into a rock garden or things like that. That one in the middle was one of the homes on the Beautiful Backyards tour from Green Neighbors. And I'll give you their link, clarkgreenneighbors.org. They've got some great resources for natural gardening and some of these different landscape features that we're talking about. And they have this Beautiful Backyards program that used to be a live kind of self-guided tour that you could go on, but now they've turned them into story maps. Which is actually really cool. They did a great job with it. And if you're looking for inspiration for what to do, I highly recommend checking out that Naturally Beautiful Backyards. There's about maybe 7 to 10 different folks throughout the county who signed up and kind of are recognized as a naturally beautiful backyard. And they've put in a lot of thought, a lot of effort, and a lot of time into their yard, and not just for doing it for their stream or themselves, but they also are doing it to share with all of us, which I appreciate. Another thing that you can do, permeable pavers. We see permeable pavers a lot of times in parking lots. And part of that is because when they do build a new parking lot, the Washington state law says now that when you have a new development, you have to infiltrate all of your stormwater runoff on site. Basically, treat this like it's a forest. And so, these businesses, these developers can have a couple options. They can say, okay, well, I can, build a stormwater facility like a detention pond or something like that, which can take, a half an acre or maybe an acre or maybe more. Or you can do this thing called low impact development, which is a series of different kind of ways to manage that stormwater on site as part of the built environment that actually has a function too. So that's where permeable pavers come in. So if you have a new kind of patio project, or you could do something like that where downspouts could disperse to. I actually really like these grass pavers that you see in the upper right-hand corner. I had a drainage issue in the first home that I bought. At the end of the driveway, it was kind of up to an alley, and it kept flooding and flooding and flooding. And so I got in there and I dug kind of deep at the end of the driveway. I cut that concrete out, kind of called depaving, which is kind of a practice that you can take and look more about. But I installed a couple of these grass pavers at the end of the driveway. Structurally, they were great, and they solved that drainage issue of that water ponding up in the back of the driveway. And so I would really be an advocate and recommend those grass pavers. They weren't too expensive to buy, and they're pretty easy to use. And it kind of gives you that best of both worlds, a little bit of grass and a little bit of a hard surface that you might want for some of your different activities. We got another one here. This is these are rain planters. And I don't see these a whole lot of places, but they are around here and there. This one in the upper right-hand corner is called a Gradix box. And this was something that was pioneered, kind of invented by some folks at the Port of Vancouver, because, with their large roofs and the industrial things going on there, and a lot of galvanized metals up there, their runoff has higher loads of heavy metals than what might just be coming off a residential roof. And so they were looking for ways to be able to manage their stormwater simply, effectively, and to remove some of those pollutants. And so inside that Gradix box, you would see obviously you can see some plants coming out the top. There would be some kind of like a high organic material content soil mix. They call it maybe like a rain garden soil mix. And that stuff that is really good at capturing some of these different pollutants that are in the water. Some of the heavy metals can stick to some of these organic materials, particles, and then as the water will flow through, the water will come out cleaner than when it came in. And you'd have some sand below that to add some additional filtration. And then you'd have probably some rocks below that to create some space. And then of course the overflow at the bottom there. So these are some different ways that you could kind of create a little landscape feature that's a little bit more self-contained. And also it's kind of nice that, if you are challenged with, bending over and getting down real low for a lot of gardening. I know that I've seen more and more folks have garden boxes that are raised up a little bit higher, so they're just easier to reach. And so this could be an opportunity to manage some of your stormwater on site, have a raised kind of garden bed, and have something that looks really nice too. Here's a big one, the rainwater harvesting. I always get this question, so in case anyone has it already, I get it less and less now, but I would often get it when I worked at WSU Extension. They would say, I heard there was a law that says you can't harvest rainwater in Washington State. So that kind of goes back to like water rights law, and the idea is that all the water that falls from the sky is actually property of like communal property of us, of the state, if you want to think of it that way. And so no one was allowed to just take it. Now that was kind of written under water rights law, which is very old and antiquated, where you did have limits and all sorts of things, but they started, the Department of Ecology, which kind of managed those rules, started, scratching their heads thinking, okay, I can kind of see how this might make sense in Eastern Washington, but here in Western Washington, where we're already dealing with too much stormwater, I'm not quite sure that prohibiting rainwater harvesting really matches with our goals and our intentions. And so what they say now is that you can harvest rainwater as long as it's from a structure that's not just for harvesting rainwater. So you couldn't build a big bowl with a funnel, a humongous dome bowl or something, and just to get the water. But if you have a structure and it's collecting water, you're totally within the letter of the law to harvest that rainwater if you have a good beneficial use. And good beneficial use can be a lot of things that I don't know if it's been challenged yet. So now that being said, our climate doesn't really lend itself terribly well for rainwater harvesting. I mean, it can help some. I kind of think of these rain barrels as kind of a good step for disconnecting a downspout, because you will collect some water. You'll probably have some water in early spring to use for a little bit. But let's be real, by mid-July, unless you have a 1,500 gallon cistern, you might be out of water. But it can still be a good thing for our streams, directing your overflow pipes during the wet season, just keeping that tap open and your overflow sized appropriately, and you have those hoses running off to a landscaped area. Now you're basically doing something good, just disconnecting your downspouts. Springtime come around, when the rain starts to become a little bit more sporadic, you close up the spigot there, and you use that water in between those rain events to water your gardens. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Other people have said, okay, well, one rain barrel, yeah, that's not going to be much, but maybe if I got 3 and let my kids paint it, like up there in the upper left-hand corner there, sure, that's great. And you can attach those rain barrels. You can either attach them at the bottom together so that they all flow up at the same time, or you can attach them at the top so that one flows up and then the next one flows up and then the next one flows up. Different ways to do it effectively, kind of the same type of thing. You can see here that picture on the right there, looks like they're kind of doing a little bit of a rain garden with it looks like their rain barrel, or I would call that a cistern actually, is going to overflow into their rain garden, which I think is a great way to combine a couple different things that were stream-friendly practices that we're talking about. All right, let's move on to rain gardens. Well, rain gardens can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And just like we looked at some calculations for how much area in our yard we would need to disperse our stormwater based on how much area that we're receiving that water from, rain gardens will be sized in a similar type of methodology. So kind of an anatomy of a rain garden. You got a flat bottom, and it's kind of a dish-shaped garden. So the typical kind of idea here is you want to get that bowl shaped, but with a flat bottom. Get some of that native soil out, particularly because a lot of our native soil is just, it really depends on where you are, but I know that somewhere maybe around Camas or like Lower Vancouver, maybe more gravelly. If you're up in Battleground, you might be more clay. I know I'm kind of like not far from Bridge Creek, close to downtown. We've got good soil. When you're around the plains, like Fourth Plain, Mill Plain, you kind of know that like that was a good area because that was where they wanted to have agriculture first, and then they plant their last crop, which was my driveway and the road that leads to it. But that's pretty good soil. So it really depends on if you can use your native soil. At the very least, you would have to amend your native soil, no matter what it is, with some compost, or maybe you bring in some other type of rain garden soil mix to kind of put back in there. But you'll have a mulch layer. You want a ponding depth of, no more than 6 inches typically. They say 6 to 12 here. You want gradual side slopes so that they're not eroding. It can have some stability. You need a place for the water to get in, and you need a place for the water to get out. And then you probably want some berms to be able to kind of control overflows, so that you can control where the water is overflowing. It's, if you have a big rain event, it's not just going to wash everything away. This is the book that I want you guys to look at if you are interested in doing a rain garden. I think it was published about 10 years ago. It is a great guide. I love that it's really specifically designed for Western Washington. And it's just, not only is it a great guide for planning, for getting your hands dirty, for the things that you need to be considering. There's a huge native plant guide at the end, which will be really helpful for planting a rain garden or meadowscaping, or even just adding native plants to your landscape, which is just going to be a good thing, because we know that those native plants aren't going to need any inputs like fertilizer or pesticides. So the first step, is to plan that garden. Again, here, we got out our graph paper, we drew out our home and our sidewalk. We included things like our trees, because we don't want to be digging under the drip line of a tree, which is basically, that's why, when they put a tree there, they drew it. They drew the drip line, they drew the kind of the area that the canopy covers, because you don't, because that canopy typically corresponds with the width of that the roots go out. So you wouldn't want to be doing something like a rain garden or disturbing the soil under that drip line, because you wouldn't want to be interfering with the tree roots there. And they have all of their impervious surfaces marked. They've got their downspouts marked, so they have some ideas of points where they could be doing this. They marked a low point over there by the garage or by the driveway and the sidewalk, and then they would be doing a soil test for infiltration. Again, they're getting out their graph paper again, and in this time they drew the graph paper with a couple of different colored lines, and they did this to give you the bird's eye view of the different, kind of like a topographical map, the different heights of the rain garden. So that light blue line on the inside corresponds to the dimensions at the top of the rain garden soil mix. And then the next part on the inside is where they expect where the top of the ponding surface is going to be. And then that last line, that dotted line on the outside, is actually the entire overflow containment area, kind of basically your entire rain garden. Got to mark the inflow, got to mark the outflow. And the rest of it from there is a way to kind of just think about what shape you want it and where you want what. And then again, what I mentioned before, that it's nice to have this on a graph paper, because you may not want to have just a square. In fact, most people might not just want to have a square or a rectangular shaped rain garden. You might want to take inspiration from nature and have it some other shape. But now that you've done that, you know, and you have it on your grid and you're drawing it out, you can kind of count the boxes to confirm that that your shape does match up with the required size of the rain garden that you need to infiltrate. So you start then, and you start to build. You've done your planning. Okay, I should mention this. We are in a really good time for planning right now, actually. If you were really going to get going quick, you could maybe plan and start to, well, yeah, now is the time to plan because you really want to be digging in the summer. So you plan now, take your time to plan now, pick out your plans, talk to people about it, get your team ready because this is going to be a team effort unless you just have a big family or super strong and have a lot of endurance or want to hire somebody. But do the planning now, think about what you're doing, and then you want to go out there and you want to prep your stuff. And so when you're prepping it, let's say you've got your plan on paper. What they've done up in here in this top photo here, they've actually just taken like a garden hose and they've just kind of put the garden hose out as the plan says it would be for the rain garden. So you can get a visual confirmation on the ground. It's important to do that. Take whatever you have in the paper and get it on the ground some way before you even break ground, just so you can kind of tweak any type of, make any changes that you might need for improvements. You can do that with that garden hose like they have up here, or you could have some stakes and string out your plan that way. But the big thing before you have all your team over to help you start digging out, call before you dig, because you might have some utilities or different things under there that you'd want to make sure you know about. And then also be thinking about whether you're going to be amending your native soil with compost or whether you're going to be bringing in a different kind of rain garden mix, because that will determine, you know, what you're going to do with the soil that you take out when you do that. When you do start digging in, you start taking out, then you are going to want to keep some of that native soil to be a berm kind of around the rain garden to kind of control the overflow. And you are gonna, that's the one part you're gonna want to compact a little bit to make sure that it can stay in place. Well, we'll move on to build. So that's when you want to start to get in there. You want to, you know, disconnect your downspout and dig a trench for your pipe. So now your downspouts going out to your rain garden, like in the picture up top there. Again, this is also a place that I think just works so well with one of those faux streams, with one of those kind of those infiltration trenches. Although I guess it's not quite an infiltration trench because you do want some of the water to actually reach your rain garden. But one of those faux streams is a great thing there. I mean, having a buried pipe works well too. It's all about what's your fancy. You want to, again, form those berms, install the pipes. You want to reinforce the inflow and the outflow area with rocks. We do this in stormwater facilities all the time. We call it riprap. We call it basically an energy dissipator is what it really is. When that water is coming in, we want it to meet some rocks that are able to withstand that force and that pressure, rather than it, you know, eroding your rain garden, which of course at the top is going to have some lighter soil. It's going to have some mulch, and so without that kind of those rock layers, those cobbles at the inflow and the outflow, you're going to have more tendency to have some erosion issues there. And you're going to want to fill back with your mix. You know, we kind of jump into the plant area here. I guess that building part is something that you'd be doing. You may have already been planning what kind of plants you want at the initial stages. But then you may, you know, in doing that part now, and then the summer comes around, and yes, when you have your work party to dig out and get your soil back in there. And you probably want to do this. I mean, yeah, it's kind of tricky to time it just right, because if you wait too late, at the end of August, I mean, the soil might be too hard to get a shovel in. So maybe the kind of thing you want to do early in the summer, just let that hang out for a little bit over the course of the summer so that you can get ready to plant where we're at now. Right now actually would be the perfect time to plant. They say September to November is a good time to plant. Maybe you just want to hedge your bet a little bit with October to November these days. I know that some of the summers can really run into September quite a bit. And so, I think October is just a perfect time, because you want to be able to get that plant in during a time that it can really have as much of a rainy, wet season to just establish its roots. And so when we think about rain gardens, we think about them in 3 different zones. Zone 1 is the one that is like the flat part of the dish on the very bottom. Not surprisingly, that's the wettest part. And that's where plants that like having wet feet need to go, that can tolerate being, kind of underwater for, days on end, depending on what kind of weather. Like we had a week or so ago, those plants would be wet for about a week. And then zone 2 would be along kind of the slopes. And those are plants that can tolerate wet feet, but they don't need the wet feet. And they also, they can also be a little bit drier. Zone 3, those are plants that prefer to have the drier feet. Kind of get into some more of the trees and some of the bigger shrubs in that area. Whereas, zone 1, you can probably guess a lot of sedges and rushes and different grassy plants. And then there's a number of plants that can be in 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. So there's some overlap there for sure. And that rain garden handbook does a really good job of listing a whole bunch of different plants. I mean, there's pages and pages of plants, and it will list, what zones are suitable for, if it's suitable for sunny environment, or if it's suitable for better for a shady area. It'll tell you if it's a native or not a native. It'll tell you if it's a pollinator, and I think it even tells you what period it will flower, which is another neat thing to incorporate into your planning for our local bees. It's nice to have that pollinator kind of in a succession, so that not all of your plants are flowering, right in April and May. Some plants maybe you want to plant in your rain garden that will flower in July, and maybe you'll want to plant some that flower all the way out into August or something. So you can find some of that information in that native plant guide. This is kind of the best part. You get to, plant your rain garden, choose your plants. So you want to keep in mind when you're choosing these plants, not just the size that they are when you buy them from wherever your plant person is, but be sure to ask, how big does this get? Because particularly some of the plants in especially zone 1, they can get pretty big with all that really rich soil, that rain garden mix in there. So try to keep in mind about how they're going to be when they're mature, which is sometimes you see a newly planted rain garden, you're like, at least I'm like, if I didn't know, why didn't you plant more plants? It looks kind of sparse. Well, they're probably planning for the future when those plants get bigger. You can also think about layering your plants with a mix of trees, shrubs, and ground cover, so you kind of have some different levels of your rain garden. And this is your time to plant your passion, whether it be pollinator habitat or wildlife, or you just want strictly native plants. There are even some plants that can go with that are edible, thimbleberry or salmonberry. We do not recommend that you plant edible plants in zone 1 or 2, but zone 3, that's not going to be in the runoff, then I think that that's suitable for rain gardens. Oh yeah, and then mulch, of course. You want to mulch with about 2 to 3 inches of mulch. And then the last thing, I don't want to sound like a bait and switch here, because it's kind of like, hey, you can do this and it's a lot less maintenance in a yard. But here's a chapter on maintenance. Well, yeah, like anything, you're going to have to maintain some of it, something. I think it is easier than mowing, X number of times a year, and fertilizing and renting an aerator and dethatching. And so there will be some things you want to keep an eye on, like incoming sediment. If you are finding, you'll find this in the rocks, your energy dissipating rocks, riprap, whatever they are, you want to call them. If you're finding a bunch of sediment there, try to get to the bottom of that. That indicates a problem upstream, and try to find out where the problem is and fix it that way. If you have a bunch of bare soil areas, you want to replenish that with mulch, because I will say that sometimes rain gardens, especially in zone 1, is kind of a catch-22. We have these plants that are really good. They love the wet feet. Awesome. From September to April, awesome. But what about May, June, July, August, when the last couple of years we have not been getting much rain, and these water-loving plants are now in well-draining amended soils, that can create a problem. And we do see this in a lot of our in the stormwater world. We call them bioretention cells, but these are the kind of the rain gardens that are along the street or along the sidewalk. They're maybe not cared and loved and cherished the same way that that I know you would love your own rain garden, of course, but there is some challenges with those, in exactly what I just said, where some of the plants, the rushes and the sedges, may die in the summer because now it's in this kind of this cement box with this super well draining soil. And it's a water-loving plant. So one key for that is to add mulch, because mulch will help to keep the moisture in the soil. And then just monitor erosion within your rain garden. Sometimes along the side slopes, if water is coming in too quick, or maybe your side slope when you first did it was a little bit too steep, you'll start to get some in-cut in there. And that'll be an indication of a problem, and something that you'll want to address sooner than later. And then there's some routine maintenance, replenishing mulch. And I've specifically noted here arborist mulch, and I've got a picture of it there. Arborist mulch is really just what it is. It's that free stuff that the arborists around town are giving away, because they're going around and doing their work and collecting truckfuls of this arborist mulch, and they either need to take it over to some facility to dispose of it, or they can take it to people's homes. And so there are what is it? I think there's a website called chipdrop.com, where it's kind of like a website that tries to connect the arborists with people that want a chip drop. You can also just do it the old-fashioned way, where you call some arborists, and then I think you can get on their list. It's a little bit hit or miss. It's a good thing to kind of plan ahead for, because a lot of times my experience has been, okay, I'll call on this, and a couple of weeks go by and it's like, geez, did they forget about me? And then one day, lo and behold, I've got 2 yards of arborist mulch out the end of my driveway. So it's good to plan ahead for that. Maybe even coordinate with some of your neighbors and see if they would want some before, because it might be a lot, depending on maybe more than you need. But arborist mulch works really good because it locks up really well with all the different size and pieces of the material in there. And it breaks down really well too, to add some nutrients and to keep the moisture in there. You're going to need to water for the first 2 or 3 years to establish the plants in your rain garden. But after that, most of them should be okay. Weeding, especially in the first 2 years as the plants establish and start to fill out, will be important. And keeping an eye on your berm to make sure that it's still kind of staying pretty tight and compacted. I know I didn't get in super deep and in depth there in detail about, you know, making the berm and actually what that looks like and what to actually do step by step there. It's all in the guide, but it's something you want to check to make sure that the integrity of that berm is still being maintained. So I can talk about a few native plants. When I started making this slideshow, though, I just realized that there are way too many to talk about. So I can give you a few examples of some different plants, focusing on native plants here in zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And again, some of these, like Oregon grape, can be zone 2 or zone 3. And I think evergreen huckleberry might even be able to be tolerant of zone 2, maybe depending on a couple other factors. But zone 1 native plants, yeah, you know, you got the Douglas spirea, black twinberry, some sedges, kind of things you'd expect to see in zone 1. Oh, here we go. They're flying in. That's why. I was wondering where those were. Okay. Zone 2, the snowberry, the western columbine, and wild ginger. Again, I think some of these can be zone 3 as well. Wild ginger, that might be a zone 1 as well too. I'm pretty sure snowberry can be 2 or 3. And zone 3, vine maple. This is where you usually can start to get into your trees that I mentioned before. I like that one. Red flowering currant, I think, is also a zone 2 or 3. Mock orange, I think, is also a 2 or a 3. But you know, you can see you can get a lot of beautiful colors in your rain garden. Incorporate those native plants. Kind of do, I mean, it's a little bit of meadowscaping at the same time as doing a rain garden. So maybe even if you did a meadowscape, you had a rain garden in the center of that to kind of tie it all together. And so these are some resources that I have here, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting some of them. Oh, yeah, there is one that I'm forgetting here, but and I'll just say it right now. It's Grow Smart, Grow Safe, and it is. I think it was a website that was developed by some folks up in the Puget Sound area. I think maybe Thurston County, if I remember correctly. It's basically like a catalog of, you know, yard stuff, whether it's pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. And what's nice about it is it will kind of give you a table and rank its toxicity so that you can see, you know, how toxic that product is and whether or not you want to use it. And it will also give you some alternatives that are less toxic. So Grow Smart, Grow Safe is a great website to check out. Stormwaterpartners.com. Yeah, I'm in Clark County, but Stormwater Partners, I guess on this side here, is kind of it's basically a partnership of the local cities and some nonprofits and some agencies in Clark County and Southwest Washington that are working together to protect water quality. So a bunch of different organizations in the clean water world. And there's a lot of resources on that website, from stuff about maintaining stormwater facilities to the Explore Your Watershed story map, which is the link down below, which is in and of itself its own thing. Great type of thing. And you guys are at a library webinar here. So if you'd like to learn, check out the Explore Your Watershed. If you have kids at home, you can learn what watershed you're in, what watershed you're going to. You can learn about stream health. You can learn about some of the pollutants that we contribute to our waterways and things that we can do You can also learn about recreation. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Another great website is clarkgreenneighbors.org, where they have a ton of natural gardening resources on there, in addition to a whole bunch of other things. The handbooks that I had referred to throughout this presentation, the Western Washington Rain Garden Handbook and the Meadowscaping Handbook. Just Google those, and you'll be able to find those. Those will pop up real quick. And that's what I've got. So thank you, first of all, for you guys are doing the first step to being stewards, and I'm sure a lot of you already are. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'd like to see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, and I just want to hop on to remind people that the chat is open now. So if you have any questions, you could type them in the chat. There's a little chat icon in the bottom of your Zoom window. Or if you would like to ask a question aloud, just use the raise hand icon in the bottom, and I can grant you access to ask your question aloud. Takes a while to type a question.
I either answered a whole lot of questions or I lost a few people.
Okay, yeah, one just came through the chat, says, is there a preferred method for small backyards?
Yeah, I think that one of the nice things about meadowscaping is that, and I would encourage you to check out the handbook, is that it's really good for all sorts of different sizes of space. And with meadowscaping, kind of the example that I showed there, where it was just a little strip along, a driveway and a garden area. And so it could be as small as that, or it could be a small backyard would be great for meadowscaping. And always thinking about a meadowscape is awesome, but I would always be thinking a little bit about how I want to maneuver through that meadowscape. So planning for, being able to utilize at least some path or something through the small backyard to kind of get in there, maybe for maintenance parts, but also to be able to just take a nice little stroll through your future meadowscape. I would recommend meadowscapes for a small area. I should say another great resource is and a number of these, or a few of the photos came from homes that are being recognized in the Certified Backyard Habitat, which is a program being run through Columbia Land Trust, the Audubon Society, and the Watershed Alliance down here in Vancouver. And it's super popular, and there's already a wait list, but if you're interested in getting some additional support, including technical assistance for your efforts, I would encourage you to check out the Watershed Alliance and get on their list. And that's a really big benefit of that, having someone out there to kind of go over your plans with.
I have a question that says, what's the number to call before digging?
Oh, you know what? I'm just gonna have to Google that right now. I'll let everyone Google that. I don't have it off the top of my head. Is it 411? Is it 411? What is call before you dig? Yeah, you're right. I should have, if I wrote call before you dig in all caps, I probably should know the number off the top of my head, right? Clearly I haven't called before I've dug recently, but that's just because I haven't dug recently.
Looks like it's, I'm just on the Clark Public Utilities website, and it's called 811.
811, there you go. A couple hundred off.
Okay, we got another question from Marlene. with all the new construction in the area, what requirements are there for builders?
Builders have, they have to treat all their stormwater on site. And so we have a stormwater manual that, includes like a somewhat complex flow chart where the developers can go through and determine what type of situation that they have. And then there will be a number of different options to meet that requirement. And so sometimes, that I had mentioned before, this could be like, okay, I'm going to build a detention pond to, get all of the water from this development is going to go on this like 1.5 acre detention pond, and that'll take care of that. But, maybe the developer's like, wait a second, that 1.5 acre can be an extra, 7 or 8 homes. And so instead, what I'll do is I will make the whole road porous asphalt. So the road will actually soak in, a porous asphalt type of road and that will take care of managing the stormwater on site. Or I've seen them do that. I've seen a place that did like those grass pavers that I had kind of like talked up a little bit before. They did those along all of the driveways of every house. They had like a strip of grass pavers at the end of every driveway. And so I think more and more developers are using these low impact development practices to manage stormwater, because it means that they can, have more lots and they don't need to dedicate, 5 or 6 lots to a stormwater facility. We can kind of build it into the built environment. But the main bottom line is that all your stormwater has to be managed on site.
Just a follow-up question to that, with new buildings, are there still direct connections, or are there requirements to have the drain not be a direct connection, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so there's no more direct connections. You can't just pipe it out to the storm sewer system. We call that the MS4, which is multiple municipal stormwater sewer system. And so, if you have a detention pond and, eventually that will have an overflow, whether it's a detention pond or a swale or something, there may be a rain event that has an overflow. It has to get out somewhere. Then it can go into the MS4, the storm sewer system. But, now, they're saying no to, just directly piping it out. I think that there may be, don't quote me on this, there may be some, very rare situations where there are like maybe no possible way to do, to infiltrate on site, that they may have some type of exception there. But pretty much everywhere, there's something you can do with these low impact development practices where you can, make permeable pavers, or you could, green roofs aren't really that popular, but, could make your roof into a green roof. There's almost always something that they can do.
And I just want to remind people, you can type your question into the chat, or if you'd like to ask it aloud, you can just click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Oh, there's another question there. Any thoughts about all the recent problems in the Lacamas Lake area regarding their water retention areas being overgrown, etc.? Are there rules about maintenance and who is responsible?
Oh yeah, someone wants to ask a thorny question, huh? Okay, yeah, that I don't have a whole lot of thoughts about it. Stormwater facilities are required to be maintained, whether they're owned by a municipal stormwater permittee or whether they're privately owned, and some of them are privately owned. That's another kind of interesting thing about developments. when a developer, and this also differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions, I think up in King County, all of their stormwater facilities, I believe, don't quote me on this, is some jurisdiction up there, all of their stormwater facilities are all publicly maintained. I think they may even be publicly owned, which means that the developer has to, pay an upfront cost to, reimburse the city for future maintenance of that facility. But at least in the county, in the unincorporated part of Clark County, the developer has a couple of different options that they can either choose to maintain it for the first couple of years and then deed it over to the county, at which point the county takes ownership and maintains it. And I think the developer has to pay some additional cost for that maintenance, or they can or they can save that upfront cost, and then when they create that development, create an HOA who's, there's a lot of reasons for an HOA, but oftentimes one of the big reasons is who's going to own this stormwater facility and maintain it. And so that's another route that they can go. And so I'm not entirely sure about all of the situations around Lacamas Lake. And so I really can't speak very well on that question about those facilities around Lacamas Lake. But I am aware of a lot of the harmful algae blooms around in the lake. And I think, yeah, it's definitely something that's, there's a lot that goes into that. It's things that people put on their lawns. It's the warming of the water due to, maybe even some climate impacts. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And so I don't think there's one finger to point, and that's kind of the nature of this non-point source pollution. And some of our water quality issues today is it's not just like you can point to that factory and say, yeah, you're the reason why the Cayuga River is on fire right now because you've been dumping something there all day. It's everybody doing a little bit here and there. And I can't speak, very definitively on the Lacamas Lake thing, but I have the feeling that, there are some elements of that kind of non-point type of thought going in there.
We've got another question. Is there a county law about cutting trees that are next to a stream?
Yes. And and I couldn't tell you all of the which is which, because there are different streams that are categorized in different ways, whether I think that they're whether they're seasonal, whether they're salmon bearing, that have some different regulations, that have some different setbacks. But yeah, typically you're not to be cutting down vegetation along streams. That's a really important thing, and kind of brings to an interesting point. I had that picture of the stormwater there, all those different pollutants, but there's also a pollutant that is not mentioned on there that's considered a pollutant by the Department of Ecology, and that's temperature. Because one of our big goals are these salmon here, which are very sensitive to warming waters, and so that's just one of the reasons why maintaining that streamside vegetation, trees in particular, to create shade, is so important, which is why there's some laws about that. And if you do have questions about that, Clark County Code, you can dig in there. We have a code enforcement officer as well, the Clean Water Division. You could email me, or I could direct your question to someone that works with the code on a more regular basis.
Got a couple of questions that popped up. One is, what is Clark County Public Works part in the big picture in water health? It's the first one.
What is Clark County what?
Sorry, what is Clark County Public Works part in the big picture in water health?
Yeah, well, so every jurisdiction, once you reach a certain population threshold, you have a stormwater permit. And there's 2 different phases in Washington right now. There's phase 1 and phase 2. And that's done from the Department of Ecology. This originates from the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act, the federal program, says, okay, every state you have to designate an organization to run this, what we call an NPDES permit, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, which is like a stormwater permit for short. You have to run this, and you have to give this to, you're responsible to issuing it to municipalities like the county, like the city of Vancouver, like the city of Camas, Washougal, Battleground. Those are the cities that have it in Clark County now. There's also industrial ones, like the Port of Vancouver has one. If you're a big industry, like Wafer Tech, I think probably has one. And so, yeah, there are those kind of rules that govern, what you have to do. And so, these are rules that include everything from, what activities are you doing to prevent pollution on your roads, for example, which is why Clark County has a bunch of street sweepers, and we go out and we sweep the streets, because there's tons of pollutants on the streets. We've got, it's not getting all the oil that's being dripped, but the tire residue and litter and, all sorts of just particulate matter on the street, gets swept up. We have to maintain stormwater facilities. We have to maintain our own ones that we own, but we also have to inspect the ones that are privately owned to make sure that they're inspecting their own. We also have a bunch of requirements in that permit about measuring and monitoring water quality. And so we have our scientists that are all around, it's a team of 4 right now, actually. When we're a little bit short staffed because one of them is on maternity leave right now. But yeah, they're responsible for, in the fall, we go out and we do this thing called BIBI, which is a benthic macroinvertebrate. So what we have to do, you have to go into a few different streams of different types and different sizes and measure out a certain area. And it really looks like we're like cleaning a stream, like scrubbing rocks with a brush. But what we're actually doing is we're trying to find the insects, these macroinvertebrate insects that become things like caddisflies, or they could be like snails, or they could be slugs, all sorts of different ones. We try to find which ones we're finding in a stream. We put them in a bottle, we send them off to a lab, and they count which ones are which. And those different species have different tolerances of pollution. So if you have a stream and you're counting your insects in there, your macroinvertebrates, and you find a whole bunch of insects and you only find insects that are really tolerant to pollution, what's that say about that stream? Whereas if you find a bunch of insects and macroinvertebrates that are very sensitive to pollution, well, that means your water quality is pretty good there. So that's one way that we measure stream health and monitor stream health. We also have a bunch of capital projects going on. And so, throughout time, problems happen with drainage, and stormwater facilities fail and they need to be repaired, or they need to be retrofitted, or whatever. And so we have engineers that do that. We have a humongous mapping effort because all this stuff is underground, and the only way you really can manage it is to have a map of it. And so we have a lot of efforts with our GIS system, Clark County Maps Online, to map all of this stuff. We have like what I do. There's actually things in the stormwater permit because they realize that you can't go around handing out tickets to everybody who's over fertilizing their yard. It's just not realistic. It's not possible. So they recognize that another thing that we have to do in the permit, which will help water quality, is to have education and outreach programs to help educate our residents. So thank you all for being a part of that right now, about what each of us can do and have like an individual responsibility for that. And so that whole team kind of, there's a ton of things. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg. That's not even to mention like what we do for our business inspections, and we work what we call source control, and we go out to businesses and we talk to people. We talk about the ways that things they might be not doing right, or the things that they could be doing better. We find problems and we fix problems. And so, we've got a we do have a fairly low stormwater fee comparatively in unincorporated Clark County. I think we're doing a lot with that, and you know, I think comparatively our staff is pretty. You know, I think we're doing a lot compared to some other jurisdictions that might have more staff or more resources, which is why things like Stormwater Partners is important to kind of pool our resources together. So yeah, I think that we do, you know, we do take ownership with of our waterways, and we do that by meeting our permit requirements as handed down to us from the Department of Ecology. We do everything we need to do to meet the permit. And I think we also do some things that go a little bit above and beyond here and there too, where it makes sense and where it really does something that'll help further down the road.
Looks like we have a couple questions from the same attendee. I'll ask them both. One is, we tried to plant alders on a neighbor's property for them to shade their stream, but they were overtaken by blackberry. How to solve? And the second question is, what is the impact of all the invasive ivy that is taking over forest lands on stream-bearing property? Does ivy contribute to erosion? What are good erosion controlling plants for stream banks?
Yeah, I would have to defer that question to my colleagues over at Vegetation Management. But I will say that, yeah, invasive species are an issue, and thank you for planting alders. They're great along stream sides, great for shade. And sometimes, you know, I'm not sure where they are in the growth. I know that sometimes the hope is that comparatively fast growing trees like alder can maybe grow that canopy, which will eventually kind of shade some of that blackberry, and try to, you know, go back later after you kind of have some canopy working against the blackberry, and maybe try to treat it there. But I would definitely reach out to Clark County Vegetation Management to see what kind of thing that they would suggest doing, because you know, I think the person that asked this question is probably thinking about this too. Like, you can't just rip everything out right away without putting something back, because you know, bank stabilization is also important, which is why there are so many regulations about, you know, vegetation, what you can do like on the riparian area, in that area that's right along the stream, because it is such a sensitive area. It's a type of area that is the area that's used by our animals. Almost all of our animals are using that area at some point in their lives. So our wildlife is using it. It mitigates flooding. It's a kind of the last way to filter pollutants before they run directly into streams. So, you know, these riparian areas do a lot of heavy lifting, and so I wouldn't want to say the wrong thing about what to do for that specific type of situation. But with regard to the ivy, yeah, I think, you know, ivy can kind of crawl up and eventually suffocate a tree, and that's not good. So that's something that should be addressed and needs to be addressed. But I think that that's a good one that a lot of volunteers can address, because there are some, as I had mentioned before, like, you know, Japanese knotweed, for example, where, you know, if that's not something that volunteers can just go like pull, because it'll just keep coming back. And oh, by the way, every time that Japanese knotweed breaks off in another piece and floats down the river, next time it hits the next bank, wherever it is, it can start a whole new plant. So, so I think that kind of on the hierarchy of like what we need to address most critically, ivy might be a little bit lower, but also what's nice about it is that it's a little bit higher with regard to, you know, what volunteers and people can do, like the average residents.
Any other questions?
These have been great questions. You guys are crushing it. I don't get to do this all the time, especially, you know, post COVID. And thank you for all these very well thought out questions.
I just wanted to say that there was a comment earlier just saying thank you for your presentation. Yeah, maybe just do a last call for questions. And if there's not any, Marlene, do you want to add anything?
Just to thank Eric, it's been great. I think it's been really helpful, covered a lot of different scope and gave us some good resources, and thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks again. And I'll send out the recording to everyone who has registered for this event.
Great.
All right. Well, have a good evening, everyone. And Eric, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah, it's going to be nice.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.